For that. I'm Tatiana, the Restorative Practices Coordinator from the Oak Park Public Library. The library is proud to be hosting the program in collaboration with the community group Walk the Walk. The library is committed to being an anti-racist organization. It is built into our strategic plan, and we recently hired a director of anti-racism and equity. In my role as Restorative Practices Coordinator, I focus on peace circles, collaborating with other community organizations and members, and developing programming with a holistic view of anti-racism and multiculturalism. Tonight, after we speak with representatives from Asheville, there will be time for Q&A. During the program, you are welcome to type questions using the Q&A feature. We will get to as many of the questions as we have time for in the last portion of the program. Now I will pass it over to Danielle Morales-Klima.
Hello, everyone. So I am from Walk the Walk here with Christian. Thanking so much the Asheville City Council members for joining us tonight. Thank you for your time, for your energy. And so what I wanted to talk to you guys about was the history of restorative justice and the roots of it, and honestly just the history of justice in general, and how we have done different things across the centuries, across the millennium to restore justice or to not restore justice. So the practice of restorative justice is something that lately has been kind of a buzzword, and it would almost lend you to think that it was new, but it has Indigenous roots. In this context, Indigenous is any way of life that existed prior to colonialism. So New Zealand, North America, African traditions, all of it would be Indigenous. So one of the first ways is conferencing was adapted from the Maori people in New Zealand. Circles can be attributed to the First Nations people in Canada. Similar justice practices were used by the Ottawa, Chippewa, and Navajo tribes in North America, as well as in many African traditions. Our current justice system, Western justice system, is based on the Roman notion of just deserts, and it's relatively new. Seemingly, and this is a quote from this book, where I got a lot of this information. I love this quote: seemingly the intent is to harm people who harm people for the purpose of showing that harming people is wrong. This adversarial vision of justice arose around 1200 AD with the dawning of the nation state and racial capitalism. Punishment became socially sanctioned vengeance with no emphasis on healing or restoration. Even murder historically was not punishable by death in most societies prior to 1200 AD. For instance, in ancient Zimbabwe, if you killed someone, you would pay the wrong family 109 goats. If you didn't have any goats, you would send one of your children to live with the family. If you had no children, another member of your family would live with the offended family. Importantly, the person who went and lived with the other family was expected to serve them, but they were also accepted into the family, treated as an equal. They were free to marry, to earn a livelihood, and essentially be free. This type of justice was focused on repairing and rebuilding, and with an emphasis on strengthening relationships and bringing social harmony, but not on vengeance, not on an eye for an eye. So fast forward, in 1493, the Papal Doctrine of Discovery decreed that any land not occupied by Christians was there to be, quote, discovered, and that, quote, barbarous nations were meant to be overthrown. This gave carte blanche for Europeans to enact racial terrorism on anyone who was not a Christian European. So in the 1500s, Native American elders gathered in Mexico as they faced the first onslaught of colonialism. Through their scientific practices, Cuauhtémoc, which is a great Aztec ruler, recognized that humanity was entering a dark sun period, which he prophesied would continue for 500 years. At the end of this period, humanity would enter a bright sun of human consciousness. During the time of the bright sun, ancient knowledge of the earth would reemerge. So this has turned out to be true. In the 1980s, Chief Justice Emeritus of the Navajo National Supreme Court, Robert Yazzie, began speaking and writing about Navajo restorative justice practices. In the 1990s, Dr. Morris Jenkins began researching and publishing about the justice practices of the Gullah, and African descended people living in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Sea Islands who preserve and today still practice African lifeways. In 1991, Judge Barry Stewart of the Yukon Territorial Court introduced the sentencing circle as a means of sharing the justice process with the community. Harold and Phil Galinsky and Chief Mark Wedge of the Tlingit First Nation were also key to disseminating the peacemaking circle processes and revived traditional peacemaking circles. In 1995, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa to address what happened under apartheid. And Ubuntu was the philosophical cornerstone. Ubuntu hails from the Zulu, Xhosa, Sawana, Benda, and other African traditions and means I am because we are because I am. Also understood as a person is a person through the relationships, meaning you can't harm one without harming everyone, can't be harmed without everyone being harmed. In African Indigenous justice, vindication of the person harmed is prioritized. The person responsible and often their family is obligated to offer apology, recompense, and reparation to the harmed. The act of the harm is shamed and not the person who did the act. In the wake of harm, making it right is not an individual responsibility. It's the responsibility of the entire community. The focus is on repairing and rebuilding relationships with the intent of bringing social harmony. African Indigenous justice seeks to strengthen relationships with win-win outcomes. So in general, Indigenous practices have contributed to restorative justice in at least 3 ways. They've demonstrated that justice practices may reflect an intention to repair harm rather than simply to inflict similar harm. Conferencing and circles were also from these practices. And in many non-Western societies, the memories of these practices have contributed to overall acceptance of them. Regardless of where they come from, Indigenous justice tends to have the following in common. It is healing, relational, community-based, inclusivist, participatory, needs and accountability-based, and forward-looking. In most Indigenous nations, there is no word for and therefore no concept of prison. It's important to acknowledge that even though there might not be a concept of prison in these practices, everything exists in a larger context. The predominant culture still penalizes and imprisons the most exploited amongst us. For instance, historically harmed Indigenous people in Canada are 3% of the overall population, but make up almost 1/4 of the prison population. So if we want to be serious about justice, we must address the initial harm and offer apology, recompense, and reparation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. Appreciate you laying that out. We did have one question come in asking for the title of the book that you shared briefly. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, so this is The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives Healing and U.S. Social Transformation by Fania E. Davis.
Perfect.
And I'll write it in the chat as well.
Perfect. And did I hear you check that out at the local library as well?
Of course I did. The local library, who I hope forgives me for all my late returns.
Thank you for sharing. All right, so I'm not going to hold you up from the program too much longer, but did want to set a little bit of a foundation for what we'll be talking about this evening. So I'm going to share my screen quickly. Actually, and before I do that, actually, I'll just say a tidbit about our group, Walk the Walk. Walk the Walk, we're a small community group. Our mission is to break down systemic barriers to equity through demonstrative activism, grassroots initiatives, and community bridging. And our mission is a world where there are no barriers to equity. And we've been working over the past year and a half, close to 2 years, on a bunch of different initiatives in town. And this reparations has been one of those. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about types of reparations to kind of set the context for what we'll be discussing this evening. Can you all see my presentation there? Perfect. Okay. So there's some different types of reparations. There's federal reparations. On the federal level, this conversation is largely centered around the repairing the harm done by legal slavery in the United States of America. That conversation has ran the gambit from 40 acres and a mule that was promised post emancipation to HR 40 being stalled in Congress for the last 30 years or so. There's also state and county reparations. On a state and county level, that can look a little bit different depending on the state. So obviously there were some states with legal slavery. There were some states that did not have legal slavery. And so the debt and the claim may look very different, but there still may be a claim there. And so, for example, the state of California has recently launched a task force to research and look into how they can repay the debt to their residents in the full state. Then there's local reparations, which is payments, or which I shouldn't say payments, which is reparations given by local municipalities. And so when you're thinking about that, it can look very different depending on the municipality and what the claim and what the harm that was committed there was. So nationally, cities like Asheville have taken this on. So we're so excited and lucky to learn from them tonight. And closer to home, Evanston, Illinois has embarked on this journey and has been on that for the past 2.5 years or so as well. And in Oak Park, we launched our reparations journey about a year ago, but we launched our reparations task force last week, which is made up of 9 Black residents who will make recommendations to the 6 taxing bodies of Oak Park residents, Oak Park for-profits, and Oak Park nonprofits on how to repair the harm done to the Black community here since 1880. And then there's privatized reparations. It's no mystery in this country. Many businesses and companies were founded during slavery and made their initial fortunes off of slavery. Then post-slavery, many companies made money off of segregation and the war on drugs, et cetera. So what does that look like for private companies to try to repair the harm that they did to communities and Black people, more specifically? But tonight, of course, we'll be talking about local reparations. So what are reparations? Of course, we'll dive into that a little bit more in a minute. This definition is pulled from Evanston's definition of reparations, which is reparations are a means of addressing the wealth and opportunity gaps residents experience due to historical racism and discrimination. I also just like to note, as Danny mentioned, there are different types of justice, as you can see there. And tonight, our conversation will focus on restorative justice. Reparative justice falls under there, and the different ways we can contribute to reparative justice. So, stop sharing my screen. And I will introduce our wonderful panel this evening. So we are lucky to have with us the mayor of Asheville, Esther Manheimer. Esther has been the mayor of Asheville since 2013 and is currently serving in her 3rd term. She's a longtime Asheville resident, was born in Denmark, and Manheimer is also an attorney who specializes in land use and commercial litigation. We also have with us Brenda Mills. Brenda is the Equity and Inclusion Director for the City of Asheville. She is a veteran of the city as well, and the former Neighborhood and Community Engagement Manager. So lucky to have your breadth of experience with us. Sage Turner is an Asheville City Councilor, Urban Planner, and Project Manager. She works closely on affordable housing for the city and assists in regional housing planning and funding. Thank you for being here. And Kim Rooney, who is an Asheville City Council member. Kim is a community organizer, music educator, queer abolitionist, friend, and neighbor living on the ancestral land of the Anadigwa, please correct me on that pronunciation, and the Cherokee. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, we appreciate it. And actually, Kim, would you mind correcting me on the pronunciation of that name before we move forward?
So I'm still learning this word, but my understanding is it's the Anikiduwagi.
Anikiduwagi. Thank you. Thank you. No, that's important that we get that right. So thank you. Perfect. So we just wanted to start off with a little bit of context for our viewers and for us as well. Can any one of you tell us a little bit about Asheville demographics, culture, history, anything of that nature?
Well, sort of a Wikipedia version. Hi, everybody. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm the mayor of Asheville, and we have about 93,000 people now living in Asheville. We are in the, behind me is a picture of the city of Asheville at sunset. It's actually dark out now, but just that's what it looks like at sunset. And we're nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains in way western North Carolina. We are predominantly white city. We have lost our Black population percentage-wise is down to around 10%. Maybe somebody else can give an exact number, but it's 10 point something. We have a growing Latino population, conversely. And we have demographically other minority groups that make up much smaller percentage than those that I just mentioned as well. We, we're infamously a tourist town because we have the Biltmore Estate here, and a lot of people, that's kind of what Asheville's original claim to fame was and still is. The Blue Ridge Parkway runs through it. So we see a lot of visitors and tourism in Asheville, but we also have, we're sort of the economic hub of Western North Carolina. So a lot of people come into the city for work or doctor's appointments or shopping or whatever the case may be. We have the major hospital and so on and so forth. So we support kind of the region economically and in other ways. I know you all are, I guess what you consider a suburb of Chicago, right? Right adjacent to the city. And your population is over something like 55,000, something like that.
Correct. Yeah.
And your African-American population looks like it hovers more around 20%. One thing to think about in this process is the history of the South and race is very much with us every day today. And so when we talk about these kinds of issues, it's in that context, and especially for a lot of the older white and African-American members of the community who remember desegregation of schools. The city actually, almost all of our parks and rec centers are formerly Black schools that Black students had to leave to join white schools. So very interesting intertwined relationship between the city and the Black community due to us being a southern city. There's lots more to talk about, but just in working through this, I've noticed the difference in talking with cities that don't have that that exact kind of history that we do in the South.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that context. Does anybody else have any other context they think would be helpful for us to know as we start this conversation?
Hi there, Sage Turner. Mayor did a great job. I would add that here in Asheville, we have the largest opportunity gap. And we also have a very low percentage of home ownership amongst our Asheville Black population in general, people of color. Two very stark demographic points to mention.
Got it. But no, that's helpful for us to understand the background of what might have precipitated your journey for reparations. One question, I know you mentioned that the Black population has declined over the past few years or so. Is there anything you think contributed to that? And if we're getting too far ahead, and we'll get to that later, we can get there. But I didn't want to let that move on without mentioning it.
I'll speak a little bit to. Oh, Brenda, go, yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak to it, and Mayor, please follow through. I have been in Asheville this year 29 years. When I moved to Asheville, the population was around 20%. Part of it is the death of older people. A lot of our kids that leave here for college do not return. And a lot of people, some people are looking for their culture. And so they move to places like Atlanta, Durham, Raleigh, things of that nature. And then a lot of it is moving just next door to Greenville, South Carolina, because the cost of living is too high to buy homes within the city limits. A lot of people will go to the county, but for the most part, they've left and gone to other places where the cost of living is not so high. So that's a little bit of it.
And we're growing. North Carolina is a really fast growing state, and so is the city of Asheville and the county that we're in. And our growth, I think you'll see, is not in Black population in the city of Asheville. So there's sort of a dilution, if you will, of those who are coming to locate here and growing our numbers and diluting our minority population in the Black community, just to clarify, because our Latino community is growing.
This is Kim. I'll just lift up what I hear from my students. So I hear that they need to leave Asheville because the city has no love for them. There's nowhere to work. That's not a low wage tourism job. There's nowhere to live. They see their parents struggling to make ends meet on 2 or more jobs. And that the impact of the pandemic, adding to the emergencies around systemic racism and climate change, is really heavy, and they don't feel like there's a place for them here.
Thank you all for sharing that. Interestingly enough, Oak Park's Black population has declined a bit over the past 20 years or so, and we hear many of the same things from our youth and from the residents as well. So definitely important points. So moving on a bit, now we have that context. Can somebody speak to the genesis of the idea for reparations in Asheville? What was it born out of?
Okay. Councilwoman Roney and Turner weren't on when we first adopted the resolution, and Brenda wasn't yet our equity and inclusion director. But we did it. If you've studied Evanston, which it sounds like you might have already, we did it the opposite of Evanston. So Evanston had formed a commission first, I believe, and did a lot of community outreach. And I listened to a good summary of their process and listened to some blurbs from their community meetings, heard a lot from the community, and then the commission put together a report and recommendation that went before whatever Evanston's equivalent of a council is, who then, and it sounded like it took actually a very long time, I'm making it sound short, right? And then they voted on the funding piece. We did it the opposite. We adopted in very quick time, without committee process or community input, a resolution in support of reparations, very broad. You can read our resolution. And then we kind of backed up and said, all right, what's this going to look like? And it called for the creation of a commission, which we're right now just literally today, this moment, starting the process for taking applications for appointments to that commission. And we can get into the weeds about that makeup of that commission if you want to. We have already done some truth-telling sessions that were hosted by the city, and community members participated in that, as well as academics and folks not even from Asheville that just have expertise. And we had three sessions like that at our city-owned auditorium that were also streamed. And then the expectation is that the commission will design a process that's supported by the city, and we have a consultant that's supporting them. Do that community outreach, what they decide that's going to look like, and then hopefully come to us with a report and recommendation. And I should point out, this is a joint effort actually between the city and the county, Buncombe County, where we're located.
Anybody else have anything? Go ahead, Kim.
Well, I feel like that it would be important to say that when we're talking about like just the genesis of the process, we have to name the deep wounds of urban renewal and redlining, and the call for the truth and the healing that is being demanded by our neighbors. Like this was not just something that came in front of the council, but it was it's a necessity that's being named.
Great. Thank you for that. No, that's, I appreciate everything both of you said. So I want to, I guess, pick apart a little bit of what both of you said. So you mentioned something about truth-telling sessions. And I feel like so much in America, this word around reparations does tend to look, you know, one way in our mind, you know, just we're a very capitalist country. So our mind goes straight to money. And you all, you know, very aptly brought up truth-telling sessions. And Danny had mentioned earlier the Truth and Reconciliation movement in South Africa, post-apartheid. So I'm curious what those sessions look like and why you thought those were important.
Sure, I'll try and address that. So we had 3 different sessions on individual topics, and we brought together, I think, leaders from the community that were well known, had long been in the community, and also we have a professor in the area that has been well versed in studying the impacts of racial division his entire career, I would say. So he was one of our presenters. And we listened both to the history, similar to what we're doing a little bit of tonight, and then also heard from the community. And if I had to share just a personal opinion on how those went, they were all impactful. However, I do wish we had done more listening from the individual community members and allotted more time to hear. So I would encourage you all to consider that if you go that route, to allot just as much time to the research and presentations, and even perhaps more to the individual input. It was very impactful to hear personally.
So, excuse me. So we started with the past. We talked about the present and what the future would look like. So those 3 sessions hit at those 3 areas. We will continue the storytelling and truth-telling as a part of this reparations process, because you've got to start digging in to what actually happened in Asheville. Who did it happen to? Where have our people gone? Are their descendants still here? Are they still living? For example, we have a historically impacted neighborhood called Stumptown. They no longer have a neighborhood. I think it was dwelling out when I moved into Asheville. We were able to get together about 15 of the members of that community. And we're hoping to keep them together, working together and meeting together. As a part of this, we have had a community that now will be registering with the city as a community, so that they can begin to work on the issues surrounding their community. They're one of the communities that has most public housing in that community. And they've had some violence and some other things that have happened. But it's a really rich community that has a lot of history. And so they're beginning to come together to really work. And so this reparations, while we're getting out the truth, is starting to put people together as a community, which we don't have a lot of that. People are kind of spread out by regions and neighborhoods, but they're now coming together to really talk and address some of the things that have happened to them. And they're really pumped to come with some recommendations. And so the project manager that the mayor spoke about, we will be doing a lot of history and training with our commission so that they are able to make those recommendations. Those will not come from staff or from the project manager. They will come from that commission. Our commission is 25 members. We've changed the dynamic a bit. We took a survey for about 2.5 weeks, got great feedback from the community. Just some general things you would hear about, making the, we've really got to dig in and figure out who is on this commission. So we did ask a lot of questions. We made them a lot simpler to understand in the process. And then they mentioned they wanted a little bit more representation by the neighborhood. So we increased the neighborhood representation by 15 to 15. The impact areas will be 10. The neighborhood recommendations do not have to be vetted with council. We will allow our neighborhoods to make those decisions and be responsible for those representatives to their community so that there's open transparency about what's going on in the commission. City council and the board of commissioner will appoint with a process the impact area and focus areas that we're looking at. And there's 5, economic development, education, criminal justice, housing, and health. And so we will have experts in those areas. They'll be interviewed by city council, board of commissioners, and then the neighborhoods will nominate their people for that commission.
Would you mind repeating those 5? I got 4 of those 5 impact areas.
Education, economic development, housing, health, and criminal justice.
Thank you.
I would also add some interesting partnerships that have been born out of this process that are necessary ingredients, I think, is our partnership with our local university, as Brenda mentioned, or Sage mentioned. We had, so not only academics, because of course reparations is sort of, it previously was sort of housed academically, and there's a lot of, you can learn a lot from how it's been studied over the years. And so there's that piece of it, but one of the other things that we're doing is we have a professor and some other folks that are studying the disparity in our Black community versus our white community and documenting it. So it's not just an anecdotal, well, I think, I know somebody, or this is actually a data-driven, measured disparity in whether it's in health outcomes or education or housing or whatever. So, and in addition to that, we have a partnership with the university in documenting those lands taken through urban renewal that have helped us create, essentially a map that shows the harm caused by the city through urban renewal, which has also led to the city working on an urban renewal policy for the disposition of property owned by the city that was originally taken through urban renewal. So this has sort of created these offshoots that are related to the reparations process, but that also help inform decisions that will dismantle continued policies that are systemically racist in nature. So anyway, that's been kind of exciting, all those different collaborations, but and that documentation. I think it's going to be critically important too for whatever result comes out of the commission recommendation, because quite frankly, I anticipate that we will have legal challenges no matter what the result, and we will need to be able to support the actions we're taking.
Got it. No, I appreciate you all sharing those facts and your insights into all of that. And speaking of partnerships, one of the things that kind of piqued my interest was when you said this is a joint project or collaboration between the county and the city of Asheville. And as an Illinois resident, thinking about our politics here, that gives me a headache and my head is spinning. But I do have to ask, what does that relationship look like? And how did that come about? And how do you see it moving into the future?
I mean, that's a lot, been a lot, you know, we used to not always get along with the county, not us, but our predecessors. You know, there was ideologically, we were divided. But that gap has closed quite a bit. And so they're very eager to partner with us on a lot of things. Now, I will say when it comes to something like this, I mean, I definitely think we're definitely driving, but they're passenger. Partner passenger. I'm not saying you're a passenger, county. You know, we're in it together, but they're definitely looking for us to lead on. And then there'll be other times we partner with them where they're more of the lead. So, but yeah, your political situation is more like a spider web. Ours is not quite like that.
Most elected officials in the nation in Illinois here. So. Yes, Brenda.
I'll also say to support what the mayor is saying, the partnership also looks like a city-county working team. So we will be meeting we met monthly until we got most of this material ready to go out in the application process. We will be meeting probably every other month just to kind of check in, talk about what's going on. They're helping us to get the word out. They're helping us to support the truth telling and storytelling. We're going to be doing oral and listening sessions with communities. We're going to go to the communities to begin to listen to their stories. As we speak now, people are pulling deeds and they're pulling information. So it's really exciting to kind of hear about, you know, the types of things they're doing. So they're going to partner with us on that. There will be more partnerships and collaborations with the county as we go along.
Great. Well, thank you. Hope that continues to be a fruitful partnership, and that's good to have that wider county support. So definitely something for us to think about here. So I want to go back at some point to the commission and figuring out a little bit more of the makeup of that. And I also want to know a little bit more about your role, Brenda. But before that, just kind of want to ask an overarching question. We've kind of talked about the history. We've talked about what you all are doing, but I really just want to get to the crux of why you think reparations in Asheville is important, and why each of you are on this journey through, I'm sure, some pushback and if I can speak at all about my journey in this, some loss of relationships and friendships as well, if I'm being honest. So I'm curious to see why this is important work to you all.
We let Kim start first.
I think I heard we're going to let Kim start. You're breaking up a little bit, Brenda.
Sorry, I was having some trouble hearing you, Brenda.
Oh,
Why is it important?
Sorry. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's about getting in right relationship with each other and not knowing what that looks like. I think is really important to honor the people who came before us, the harm that's been caused, to stop doing the harm and perpetuating it and allowing it to continue, being complicit in our budget plans and policies, and to stay faithful to the work of healing through listening, for a hopeful future for our youth and for future generations. When I hear that that loss of friendship or relationship with you, Christian, I think I see some deep wounds in Asheville, even as we're having this hopeful conversation about repair. There's still an incredible amount of distrust. There's still a lot of name concerns about, like, are you going to really listen to everyone? That it's really hard to gather that information and feel like you're not going to be vulnerable or you're not going to be retaliated against by talking about the harm that's been caused. But I think that it's important to try. I think this is the time. And we've been entrusted to do this really messy, incredibly difficult work. So while I don't think it's going to be perfect and a cause for celebration at every turn, I hope that we learn something through this. I'm certainly hoping to learn something through this and to make an attempt at that, getting in that right relationship.
I'll share something similar in that for me, I think the lasting impacts are very obvious in our community. And we've been speaking a little bit about that tonight, whether it's dwindling population, growing statistics of disparities and opportunity gaps, but really just the more personal, for me, it's more personal, having lived in this community a long time and seeing the decline and seeing my community members and friends decline and suffer. And as Ms. Mills spoke to earlier, a little bit of flight, leaving for lack of relationships or security, or really even just hope here. And I don't, just as a person, it's hard to see that and not respond. And as an elected official, it's even harder. And I know just, from a personal note as well, for me, I moved here at a time when our city was more affordable and more accessible, and it made all the difference in my life. So I understand the impact that can have on one's life and their children and future generations. And in some ways, I feel we are doing an injustice to our community and not doing everything we can to empower that and create that generational equity.
I think we're lucky to live in a city where this concept is, I don't know that I would say if you were to take a poll, you'd get a majority saying I support the concept of reparations. I think you'd say, I don't know that you would. I think that there's a lot of people who don't understand what it is and what does it mean when a city tries to do this. But I do think that a majority of the people in Asheville are open-minded about doing something, and they recognize that the status quo is not acceptable. So I generally feel supported by the community. There are a lot of questions, but be prepared. I think this word reparations, as you probably already experienced, it sounds like can be quite a lightning rod. And I think, Christian, you're sharing this division that it's created for some of your friendships, I think is almost a harder thing in the Black community. I see a lot of discussion in the Black community about whether this is a good thing or not a good thing, or and in the white community, we don't. I wouldn't say that it's quite as difficult. So I'm sorry that it creates further harm in some ways to be going through this process. But one thing that I've noticed about Asheville in the last many years, we've been doing this, at least in the white community, not in the Black community. I can't speak for the Black community, but in the white community, this process has helped normalize the discussion around race and equities. And I even see it in my own children. I mean, I have 3 sons who are 19 and younger. And just when I hear young people speak to each other, I mean, they're having conversations that certainly I didn't have at that age. And I think that has been an important process for the city to move into, to be able to normalize the conversation even.
And for me, having been here just about half of my life, I know I've been in different spaces where people try to do diversity, whether it's in the health field or in other places. I've had multiple jobs at the city, and there's never been a time and a space made for people to talk about the harm. So what happens is every time you do a project or every time you are out doing anything new, that's what comes out, because they have never been given time and space to say what happened to them. Now, I've heard these stories. And some people, they may never get to a point where they can tell that story without crying, without being upset or angry. But we have to open that space and be brave enough. And I believe our council is being courageous and brave enough to listen to what people have to say. And as a city, we ask for a lot of feedback. We talk about having a very engaged community. Well, it's the white community. It's not the Black community. So out of this process, how can we get our Black community? What does engagement look like to them? How can they have their voices heard without you have to come here or you have to do that? And I think it's like I said, there's a community going ahead and registering themselves as a neighborhood. That might not have happened ever had we not been doing this process and my past role in doing neighborhood services. But I think opening the door, it was scary to me last year. It's less because I'm working in it and I'm just seeing people open up about what they need and what this looks like, and understanding, if they're going to be an engaged citizen, like I said, what does that look like for them?
Oh, thank you all for all those answers. I'm thinking a lot, still processing all four of your answers. So I'll have to do some unpacking of that, but no, thank you. I really appreciate it. And definitely to Esther's point, it's a difficult conversation, not just with white people. It's a difficult conversation with Black people, my Black family members, as well as other people of color as well. So no, thank you for naming that. And Brenda really brought out this idea of stories and how powerful that's been for you all in Asheville. And locally, give you just a bit of context here in Oak Park. Growing up here, I was taught the first Black person to move here was in the 50s. And turns out there was Black people here as early as 1880. So when you talk about that story that is untold in our community, it's here as well. And I'm sure many other communities like it. And part of this process is telling that story. And so for our viewers, we did do a program earlier this year with a local historian, Stan West, on some of the history of those early Black residents. Encourage you to go to YouTube and look for that. The name of that was, let's see, The History of Early Black Residents in Oak Park and Why It's Important Today. So encourage you to go check that out for a bit more context. So wow, so those are powerful answers on why it's important to you all. And so I wanted to jump back in to talking a bit about the commission that you said you all are forming, in the process of forming. You said it's 25 members. I'm curious, is this going to be a paid position? Is it volunteer-based? And what any more context you can give around that?
Sure. I'm glad you asked that question. We will be providing stipends to all our members. In addition to that, we will be giving them support. So maybe that looks like childcare. Maybe that looks like technology. I actually had a conversation with Bank of America, the local marketing person for Bank of America. They're very excited and looking in ways, and we as a city are taking help from anybody we can get, because it's going to take our whole community to support this. And so we're looking at about a 19 to 24 month process. So like I said, they will be given stipends and whatever they need to make them whole to be able to participate, that's what we're going to do. But they will be paid a stipend, averaging, I think the project manager said $75 to $150 a month, depending on the number of hours they contribute. And then any other needs that they have in order to knock down any barriers to them participating. We're looking at their hours being about somewhere averaging between 5 to 10 hours a month. So they will meet as a full commission, but they will also break down into those 5 groups. We have also gotten local facilitators, people that folks know and know from the community, to be a facilitator in those individual groups. And their job is just to help them get the information they need, learn what they need to learn, help them to write down those recommendations. Our attorney is part of this, along with the county attorney. So we'll be looking at, helping them form those recommendations and what is legal and what we probably cannot do. But we still will put forth their recommendations. Does that help?
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Interestingly enough, we only had 2 meetings here in Oak Park of our task force, but that came up already, whether we were going to recommend things that we don't think are feasible, or are we just going to recommend things we just think are right, and what that pull and tug, that dynamic is. So appreciate you naming that. I'm curious, so you said 19 to 24 month process. Have you all set out what you want to come at the end of that process specifically, or is that going to be decided by the commission?
So there will be short-term goals, probably the second quarter of 2022, midterm somewhere around the end of the summer, third quarter of 2022, and then a final long-term recommendations on the first quarter of 2023. There will be a final report and an evaluation of the process by the folks who attended meetings, looking at it, the commission, and from there, council takes it over and decides what they want to work on or what they want to move forward on. This board is intended to be ad hoc, so I have not heard that it will be an ongoing board, but we've told them it will probably be 19 to 24 months at this point.
Got it. Wow. Well, that sounds like you have put quite a bit of thought into the makeup and structure of that, and what you wanted to achieve. And let me just stop for a moment and just say thank you all for taking this step. I know there's not one blueprint for how to do this. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way at this point. And so you all taking the step. I remember when I saw the headline, and I had been doing my research here for about 4 or 5 months at that time. And I remember seeing the headline that you all were moving forward on it in the summer of 2020, and just getting so much hope and excitement. And now to hear all of this today, it's making me even more excited about possibilities and things that we didn't think about here. So thank you. Thank you from definitely from me and some other people here in Oak Park as well. So you mentioned earlier, Esther, a little bit about that you all moved very quickly to get this passed and to get this through to the board table. Now, I know some of that, it was summer of 2020 as well. We all know what was going on in the country then as well. But I'm just curious, what led to moving that fast? And then I did hear that there was some, I believe from Sage, saying that they kind of do wish that on the front end, you had gotten a little bit more feedback from the community. So just wanted to unpack that a bit more, figure out what caused it to move so fast, and then a little bit more about what you would have done differently in hindsight.
Well, and I think Sage was actually talking about during the truth-telling sessions once we were into that. And I do think, to Sage's point about that, the commission will be doing community outreach as well. We had a former council member, Keith Young, who put forward the resolution. And and he kind of literally popped up with it on maybe a Wednesday before a council meeting on a Tuesday. And and as you mentioned, we were in a climate where I feel like we were struggling to meet the community's expectation that we do something to take the next step. At that point, we'd already established an Office of Equity and Inclusion. We'd already been moving, but I think in the post George Floyd protests, so many things accelerated, not just for the city of Asheville, but for other cities, businesses, other governments, and we really, there was a lot of momentum. So, and it's interesting because Councilman Young immediately lost his reelection bid. And I don't know that it was because of a reparations resolution. I have no idea. But that was kind of, that's how it came about. And, internally, we certainly had some discussion about, should we really be adopting this resolution before even bringing it to the community at all? Because it really hadn't, I mean, it hadn't been brought to the community at all. But the decision of council was to go ahead and move forward with it. So, you know, again, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and Evanston has flipped the whole thing on its head and did it the exact opposite way. So, so I think, you know, it's not like when cities are trying to roll out a new recycling program and they have 100 different cities to study how they roll out their recycling program, and they figure out what's going to work best for them, which is kind of what cities normally do. I mean, cities normally look around, see who else did it, and sort of figure out what works for them and try to do the same thing. But in this case, that's not really how, you know, there's not a lot of cities doing it yet, but there's more and more.
Got it. No, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, that's helpful as we start thinking about it more here. And so I'm curious, 24 months from now, no, let's say it's 5 years from now, you've gotten the recommendations and you've decided some things to implement, or maybe I won't put a time on it. It's sometime in the future that and some time has passed, you've been through this process. What does a repaired Asheville community look like for you? I know that there's been some mention tonight of some residents have left. So what does, in your mind, what does that look like for them? And how would they be a part of this process? So it might be a slightly loaded question. So let me just first ask, what does a repaired Asheville community look like to you? And then maybe we can move on a little bit to some of those questions about former residents.
Sure, I'm happy to try. So I think for me, it's a restoration of that hope and that trust is one component. A growth in population, I think, related to what we said earlier, but really an increase in equity and access, bottom line. So whether it's in housing, education, criminal justice, all the things we've mentioned, really, we have to begin the process. You said 5 years. I don't think that is a realistic time frame, but it's probably something we're going to be working on for a very long time. And along the way, significant increases in any of those would be successes, I would think.
This is Kim. I just dropped an article in the chat called "This Moment" by CoThink. CoThink is a organization in our community that's doing a lot of the relationship building, and it's a giving circle led by Black and Brown folks. And this statement, "This Moment," was released on June 6th, and there's some very specific asks. One of the CoThink founders, Tracy Green Washington, spoke in our truth-telling series. So I think that for me, it's important to hear what my neighbors say looks like a healed relationship. On my walk home today, I walked past this little pub that I used to work at, and there's a mural on the side that says "Reparations, cut the check." And local artist Donnie Destro painted that. I hear that we're both doing this too fast and too slow at the same time. But I'm really eager to find out, while we're doing this work at the same time that we're doing our climate justice initiative, if we can run in the direction of what love looks like, then I think that it could be something that other communities can borrow and build on, and we'll learn through this together. So I share hope, but if it takes 5 years, there's going to be a lot of frustration that we're not doing something that's meaningful, and we're just asking people to give a lot of time to listen and not act. So I have concern, while I also have hope.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair point, and I think that it's natural, I feel like, when doing this work, because we as a country haven't, always engaged in restorative and reparative practices. So it is intimidating. The unknown can be definitely intimidating. I'm curious, we talked a bit about it tonight, danced around it a bit, but and actually we talked to, I wish I could remember their name. We talked to a formal council member maybe a year and a half ago, when you all first passed it. And one of the things they had mentioned was that the tourism in Asheville had almost instantly increased at that time. Now, it's been a year and a half, so I'm not sure what the long-term impacts have been. But I'm curious, has there been any unintended consequences, positive or negative, and just helping us open our eyes here as we move forward?
I think there's been unintended and intended consequences. I have worked in the hospitality and tourism industry. I've seen the impact of parents working minimum wage jobs in this town. It's devastating, but we also made very specific choices on who to market Asheville to. Asheville has a reputation of being very progressive, and yet I hear and I believe my neighbors when they're talking about that there's a veneer, and the intention is to hide that we have these deep wounds and that we're perpetuating harm. So there's certainly unintended consequences, but it would be not right for me not to name that sometimes has been intentional harm. And I think about extraction of natural resources in addition to a human resource, and just the extraction of labor, the extraction of our tax base. And we have record numbers of tourism during the pandemic. So that has to be part of the truth telling if we're going to be real about it.
You mentioned earlier, Kim, I think the environmental justice movement or project is happening there simultaneously. I'm curious how that ties together and how you all see those processes moving forward together, if at all.
Well, there is a climate justice initiative happening. There's a really helpful website on the city's ashevillec.gov where folks can see the work that the facilitator, Marisol Jimenez, is doing with BIPOC community here in Asheville. So I'll let that work speak for itself, but we are anticipating a report coming forward in January, an update, so that we can once again hear from more neighbors about the harm that's been caused around the impact of the people on the people most affected and what needs to be done about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Norm. The environment is something very important to us here too in Oak Park. And so thinking about how those two can intertwine, we'll definitely do some research on what you all have going on there. And that us part of your city government as well. So thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you for putting that in the chat. So Brenda, I did, like I just said earlier, I was curious about your role. It sounds like it's fairly new that you were appointed to the permanent position. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your role, your responsibilities, and my ears are wide open because I believe this is something we need to do here as well. So yes, anything you can share around that.
So interestingly enough, when equity started, I think we approved a budget for the disparity study, which we did for our business inclusion program. I was in that office at the time. And we also approved to hire an equity office. The city also approved giving that equity office staff. And so we've had complete turnover of that staff. And so I was asked to take on the role, because we're now pushing reparations. You're going to need at least a project lead person from the city, as well as the project manager that we had. And This role has 3 positions. We have someone that does training internally and externally for our staff in particular, but also our boards and commissions. We're looking at expanding that a bit to other areas where we can partner with other organizations to do some training on equity and inclusion. We have an outreach coordinator. That person in particular will work in conjunction with neighborhood services, which is what I did with our outreach coordinator. And they're particularly looking to the community that we don't hear from. They don't participate, or they've not been a part of the system that we have, and how looking to meet whatever needs they have, because sometimes, that's part of the issue. They have an issue or a concern, but also how do we connect them to be a part and an integral part of what the city is doing. And then we have an analyst. We created a 15-member Human Relations Commission, and that's where I was tonight. We have a Human Relations Commission, and their work is to do, actually we brought the North Carolina Human Relations Commission program manager here to talk to them about their duties. And they're here to hear concerns, but they don't cure the concerns. Their role is to be a liaison. We did have a community relations council here that heard housing and other complaints, employee complaints, which went down probably about 10, 15 years ago. And so this was formed to kind of help with some of those concerns, and specifically those 5 areas that we're talking about for reparations. So we're trying to get them there's been a sort of a overturn of them. And if you know anything about advisory boards, sometimes they have a focus, sometimes they don't. So we're trying to refocus them. Kim Roney, Councilman Roney is our liaison. We're getting ready to go into retreat time. So, and then we're going to be working with the Office of Data and Performance, which got created last year, because data informs us about what's happening in our communities and where we see the impacts. Our city staff, starting probably at the top of the year, we're going to take each department through the equity toolkit from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, because until we start figuring out how what we do and the services we provide impact our community, we're never going to be able to heal harm, right? And the goal, our folks are really in tune to this, they're excited about it, and then that will inform our equity action plan on an annual basis. Does that kind of help? You have any other questions?
Definitely. I do have follow-up questions. I'll just try to keep it to one. You mentioned that at the very end, the equity action plan. And I'm curious, is that something that is approved by the city council? Is that kind of an internal government function? So that's a recommendation your department makes for the adoption kind of from the? Yeah, on an annual basis. So we want to keep that updated. Like I said, we've had complete turnover in the office. So I'm a department of 1. We're in the process of hiring people by the end of the year. And we want to get that plan updated, but we really want to have a realistic picture of what we need to do as an organization. You've heard the saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," and so you don't begin to start digging in and looking for how people can do things differently. We have great staff, we have great leadership in our departments, and our city manager and our executive team. But we really need to know, like, when we're doing engagement, that's not the time to figure out who do I impact, who is my audience, what kind of things have we heard, and so really digging into that. Our Parks Department did their equity toolkit before we even hired our first equity officer, so they have been leading with that for the last 4 years. So we want our other departments to do the same thing. And then it will continue. It's a living document. So it's not a one and done. We do it, we look at it, we keep it flowing so that they have a better idea of kind of, when I make a decision, this is what this decision does in the community. Because until we know where some of the pinch points are,
we just keep doing harm over and over and over again. So.
Got it. Thank you. Sounds like equity is really kind of embedded into the city government there, in a way I haven't heard from many other municipalities. So that's good to hear. And I probably will have some follow-up questions via email at some point, but thank you for sharing all of that. We did have one question coming from the audience. And the question is, what role do religious congregations in Asheville play in the movement for supporting or standing against truth-telling, supporting or standing against reparations, and supporting or standing against those who envision restorative justice? Any thoughts there about the relationship between religious organizations and this process?
I've generally dealt with the, there's several associations of African-American religious associations, because there's Baptist and there's Presbyterian and different stuff. But they have joined forces with some of our more predominantly Caucasian led congregations and the Jewish for Justice. I mean, we have a wealth of people who are looking to be a part of this restorative justice. I think they're just waiting for how do they fit? How do they lend a hand? Remember, we talked about supporting reparations in other ways other than just the stipends. So we're really calling on some of those folks. That'll be some of the work that we start doing at the top of the year, really reaching out to those folks and asking them, how can you help support this? What does that look like for you? And really, because I want to say that the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance accounts for 83 predominantly African-American churches in the city of Asheville and the Buncombe County. So that's a big impact to what we can do in the community if we partner with them. They give out surveys, they help us do outreach, but we want to have more, conversation and collaboration with them.
Can you all hear me? Oh my
You're
God.
for a sec.
Sorry, my
We know there. I see a question about Priscilla. I call her Priscilla Robinson. She's a really great acquaintance of mine. Priscilla's been working on that redlining article as it pertains to the South Side community, probably more than 15 years. And it's an amazing study. She worked with some professors across the country. She is part of that group that we met with on Sunday for the South Side community. And if you have a chance, the link is in the chat to look at her work and the results of that. It's amazing. I've come to know her very well. I like going in communities and hearing stories because those things are what empowered me as I was growing up as a child. I didn't grow up here, but I've always been in North Carolina. I grew up in the Piedmont area of North Carolina. And so she really put her heart and soul into that. She's been working on that since I met her probably about 17 years ago.
Got it. Thank you for that. I will definitely check out that article that Kim dropped in the chat. Looks like we had another question come in. Interesting. How is your library system engaging with the reparations process and anti-racism in general?
I'm glad you asked that. I should have mentioned it before, but we have our PAC library, which is located downtown, has been collecting history, oral history, written history of African Americans probably for the last 20, 25 years. And we're partnering with them to start really showcasing that. We have what we call a North Carolina room. And so we will be working with the library in conjunction with the county, because our county runs the libraries, to begin to house some of those stories and help us to put some of that history together.
Yes, no, well, thank you for that answer. That's really good to hear. Our local library has been, it's been definitely engaged in the process. And I'm reminded, I didn't actually, till I was elected to our local library board here, I never realized that other states had county libraries. And some, do it on, and it just reminds me here, it's another thing that causes segregation here and segregation of resources. Because here, every little municipality has their own library system. And that's an aside for another day, but I appreciate you sharing that little tidbit as well. It's important.
And you have to run for the board?
Yes. Yes. And so do you remember when I said Illinois has the most elected officials?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah.
But that question does bring up something that you will encounter, which is, in every state, the way government is divided up is different. So, you asked about our work with the county. One of the reasons we need to and have to kind of work with the county is because in North Carolina, the division between what a city does and what a county does is so different. I mean, the city, the city doesn't operate the library system at all. The county does, for example. This county runs the Department of Health and Human Services. The city doesn't do any of that. The county has the Department of Social Services. They have, so anything sort of health related, that's going to be the county. The city appoints the school board, but that's it. We don't have any other direct involvement with the school system, and neither does the county exactly, except they are the pass-through funder for the county school system. So, we have all of these siloed functions that we have to collaborate with in order to do a lot of things. And I think it's very frustrating for constituents because they'll, that's not how people work, right? I mean, people are holistic, they're a one thing, and they have needs, whether it's health or housing or education or whatever it is, transportation, you name it. And to try to explain to folks, well, we only do the work in this area or that area, and we don't do this or that, it's very unsatisfying and it's not very effective. So it does require this extensive collaboration to really leverage more of what we can do. So my brother lives in Chicago and my sister-in-law works in healthcare there and has been working on out of a shelter with a medical facility embedded in a shelter. And, she was sending me all the documentation about how they structured there. And I just noticed it's so very different than the way we're structured in North Carolina.
Yes, no, that's that's a very good point, that it may have to look different here, even if we don't want it to. And even though we would love to follow your model, it may have to look a little different here. That's very true. Speaking of models, do you all, local reparations is fairly new in being initiated. It's been talked about for years, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and after many different, and instituted in a few small occasions, but generally it's a fairly newer concept. Do you all feel you have any models that you're looking to, any movements that you've tried to gain wisdom from or insight from as you've been on the journey?
Brenda, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, we have talked to everybody you've talked to. And so we're all on this journey together, and where they have made some strides and some lessons learned. Like we talked to Evanston, very, very sweet ladies. The deputy city manager there and her assistant. And when we told them we hired a project manager, she was like, oh, wow. But we have a 25-member board. They had a 7-member board. They did the process a little bit different, but we all really gleaned from each other. There's a group that I'm on that is looking at the current HR 40 bill for the federal government, and they're just talking through what some of this policy work looks like. We're members of the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. We share that with other people because that's a help to us as well. But we're all just learning this. There's no pattern for this. We're sort of setting the pattern, and we hope as a city, it's not that we're not going to make any mistakes, but we're going at it. We're going for it, and we're going at it. And we hope to be a model, just to kind of share what we've done or should have done different. But I'm seeing people become more engaged. I know now we have a secret weapon, which the county just got a hold of. We have a public engagement software tool that has allowed us to have our constituents to be more engaged. Believe it or not, our African-American citizens are more engaged because now they can call in live, they can talk and they can do it from the comfort of their home. So they can see the live video, they can call in, they can be involved. And so we kind of got them used to it, right, Mayor? So they don't want to give it up if we go back to meeting in person because it is restrictive. One lady called me when we first got started. It's called publicinput.com, sorry. We use it for our surveys, and every engagement we've done since March of 2020 is inside that system. So if we want to go back, they just added equity data models, so we can use U.S. Census data to find out where we can target our information. We can phone them, we can text them, we can email them. And so we have a lot of tools in the toolbox to be able to help us outreach. And so Evanston was just talking to public input about doing some of their public engagement. And so we talk about this in our communication and public engagement department, which I just left doing neighborhood services. You have to have a diverse portfolio. Everybody is not. I am making H signs, so I will be out this weekend and next weekend putting out signs. I got neighbors. Shannon says where we can put them. So we're going to have signs so that people kind of know what's going on, how to text us, how to call us, how to check out the information that's going on. We're continuing to put the videos out, social media. And so we've really just been sharing what we've done and listening to learn. And been very helpful to hear about, paying stipends. It's a little different here. If we pay stipends directly to people, it's income. So our project manager is a pass-through for us, and she was able to have some savings, so she will begin those stipends for us. So it's just trying to figure out, how are we able to really support people being a part of this work. So.
For me, I would add that I'm looking to see what other elected officials are doing. You don't have to look very far because we serve on the Asheville City Council with 3 Black women born and raised in Asheville. I also am sharing and learning what it means to serve during this time with following and through relationship and also the work of Mariah Parker of Athens, Clark County, Georgia, and the reparations they're working on for the people impacted by the change in Lennon in Georgia.
Thank you. Inspiring to hear how you all are moving forward and what you've looked at as well. And I, as much as I do this research, I actually did not know that name, Mariah Parker, or what's going down there in Georgia. So appreciate you sharing it, and I'm looking forward to looking into that for sure. Let's see here. We did have another question in the chat that came in. Who are the leaders in the reparations movement nationally or internationally? And is there a central location or website where their work is being documented? I can try to answer that question a little bit, and then anybody can chime in. I would say there's really no one leader nationally or internationally. Again, kind of as we've talked about tonight, it can look very different in different places. And there's a lot of different thoughts on it. There are some national organizations that have been in COBRA, for example, that has been around for quite a while. in the reparations fight. The newer group is ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery as well. That's been working on the topic as well. I would say, I'll also make a plug. We have a program on December 14th with somebody who I believe is a leader in the reparations movement, Dr. Sandy Darity. He's a professor at Duke University. He wrote the book From Here to Equality, which kind of, in my case, outlines, in my opinion, outlines the case for reparations and what it can look like in a modern economy, and how we can actually begin repairing that debt. So we have a program with him December 14th, 6:30, hosted between Walk the Walk and the library. Again, we're really looking forward to that program. And I would definitely say he's a leader in the movement too. And one more thing I'll add is that the concept of reparations in this country is actually not new, or has it not been practiced before. We can look to the end of the Japanese internment camps, concentration camps. I usually like to call them what they were as well. And there was reparations given after that. Actually, this year, under the Biden administration, reparations were paid out to Guam, a small island in the Pacific, for war atrocities. We know internationally, we've heard about reparations given to Jewish people and their descendants of the Holocaust. So it's a concept that has been implemented and done other places as well. So those are a few of my thoughts, but if anybody else have anything to add for that question, I'd love to hear it.
I put in the chat some information about Margaret Burnham she's a professor at Northeastern in your neck of the woods. And back last year, there was a day-long virtual seminar like this with a lot of folks. Professor Darity was there, different participants talking about reparations, and that's where I learned about her. And I was able to have she was agreeable to meeting with me and a couple of our county commissioners and giving us some kind of real practical advice around the reparations process. You might reach out to her. She just I enjoyed talking with her, and she was very helpful.
Thank you. So was that like, it was a little conference around reparations, or what? Yeah.
It's a whole Ta-Nehisi Coates was there. I mean, it was a little star-studded event.
Okay. Definitely.
I was just lucky enough to get invited just to watch.
Got it. Well, I'm glad you were there and learned, and probably took a lot of that back to Asheville. So that's great to hear. That the mayor of the town has been that involved as well. So you all have given us a lot of advice tonight, a lot of things for us to think about here, but I did want to give some room in case there was anything that wasn't said, and just ask specifically about what advice you have for us here as we embark on this reparations journey. And yeah, I'll leave the question there.
Well, I think you already know. I mean, you have to kind of be able to understand it's going to be a process where you're sort of making your own process. But that, and it evokes a lot of emotion from folks. So you're going to be the receiver of a lot of that feedback. So just hang in there. And, and I think, I really think developing a strong structure for the plan and the process you're going to use as a framework to be able to rely on as you go through that process. It is messy, as Councilwoman Roney said, and I think you need something to kind of ground you as you move through it.
One of the council persons, I don't remember who, I think it was the mayor, maybe, Councilman Roney. Some people said we went too fast. Some people said we didn't go fast enough. Some people said we need to slow down. you're going to get varying opinions. Just listen. Because I think when, I heard some of that, you have to directly ask people, what does that mean to you? And how does that work? How do we give everybody, you can't give everybody everything, but take your time, look at what your objectives are. What is the end in mind? And how as you're going through it, just celebrate the wins, right? Like I said, we have communities that have never been together. They probably haven't been together for the last 15, 20 years, other than the fact that most of them are family members. And so bringing those people together, we've lost some really strong icons in our community. And so we don't want anyone, we just celebrated a lady who just turned 107. So while she is still alive and vibrant and can tell her story, we want her to do that. She's healthier than most of us, but she has some rich stories to tell us about. Because one of the things I will tell you is that our parents left us more than trauma. They left us a rich culture, and they left us a strong backbone to do what we need to do. I think it's building up the community to be what we were intended to be. So I just encourage you in everything you do, and call us if we can help, talk you through it, hear you cry, whatever. We'll tell you what happened to us too. And I will say I built a resilience about hearing these stories, because they're deep to people. And I find my own humanity as an African-American woman in hearing those stories. So let it permeate you as well.
Yes, just wanted to let that sit for a moment, because no, I feel like you were speaking directly to me when you said celebrate the wins. I don't feel like I've done a good enough job on that in this process, because it is such a hard and painful work, just reliving the traumas of your ancestors. But I love that you said that our parents left us more than trauma. I was reminded of that recently at my church. We had an Elder Sunday where we honored everybody that turned 80, and in the past 2 years, since we weren't together last year. One of the pastors said something to the effect of, like, people turning 80 this year were born the same year as Emmett Till was born. And just in that moment, it just like, I just was like, my goodness, I in my life admittedly have looked back to older generations and said, why didn't they do more? Why didn't they push for more? And I heard that and I was just like, thank you for surviving. Thank you for living. So I have the opportunity to live today and do something for your legacy and to do something better for you. So they did leave us more than trauma. They left us with tremendous opportunity. So thank you for sharing that as well. I feel like we've talked a lot tonight about stories and their and the power there. So I wanted to leave the space open now in case there was any stories anybody would like to share that either resonated with them, or a personal story that they have regarding this topic.
Now, are you talking about stories from our community, or just doesn't matter? You muted it.
Sorry. I've been so good about it tonight. Yes, it could be a story from the community, something you heard right during a listening session, maybe something you experienced yourself. Anything. I know you talked a lot about all of you talked a lot about this powerful stories you heard, and definitely don't want you to have to repeat anybody else's story or feel like that, but wanted to leave some space open in case there was anything you wanted to share.
Well, we have a historically African-American neighborhood. I'm going to take a guess. This year, they're celebrating either 110 or 111 years. Burton Street in the west side of the community. And Burton Street was created by this amazing man called E.W. Pearson. And, what I heard when I started going to their neighborhood meetings is about how, and this was in the 50s, where they went to work one day and they came home in the building that used to be E.W. Pearson's store, where the community met, those places in the community where we used to meet, was torn down by the city. And so when we think about harm, when we think about, because people sometimes hold on to places and things. And so every year, except for COVID year, they've had an agricultural fair where they celebrate E.W. Pearson and his work. We have a gentleman, Dwayne Barton, who raises a garden and has amazing work over there. And so that neighborhood, I am proud to say, is the only neighborhood in North Carolina who has received a Title VI designation. So that means that DOT is getting ready to impact them again. They will probably lose anywhere from 7 to 10 homes. DOT has hired a urban planner to help them make a mitigation plan, and we're working in that community to make things better for them in the wake of that process. And it's really working well. And so I just want to lift up E.W. Pearson. I didn't know who he was. I just heard about him, and he was an amazing person. And his great grandson lives in that community now. So.
Oh, wow.
How about you all? Do you have stories for us from your community? I want to hear a little bit about your place.
Sure, I can share a couple of things. Well, one, as Brenda was sharing that story, that's essentially what happened here in Oak Park as well. We had a predominantly Black part of town that was right around Harlem and Lake, and Westgate and Marion more specifically for some of our viewers. But there was a small Black church there, Mount Carmel Baptist Church. And there's really two incidents that we look at that kind of center the crux of the case for reparations here. So one, the church, they were meeting in a small storefront before they actually had a physical their own location. And they saved, they scrapped, they got together the funds and purchased the property in a part of Oak Park, Chicago and Kyler for our viewers. And they bought the property, they got a permit from the village to build on the property. And then once they announced it in the local paper of the Oak Leaves, which is still a local paper here, they received tremendous backlash from the community. Every excuse other than race was given. I often tell people, if I use my historical imagination, I imagine it's the same things we hear when a affordable housing unit goes up today, same type of excuses, but I digress. So they got all types of feedback, and eventually the village board decided to rescind the permit and not allow Mount Carmel to build there. So that was a direct action by our local village to limit the growth of Black wealth, limit the growth of Black community here. They did eventually find a location in the area I was talking to you about earlier, around Marion and Westgate. And they had a church that stood from about 1905 to 1930. When a Marshall Field store was built nearby, and when another store was built nearby, there became a desire to turn that area into a commercial district. So they didn't use urban renewal, interestingly enough, but they something that was common in Illinois and the Chicago area, firebombing took place. And there was mysterious fire bombings that took place. Church was firebombed twice until they really couldn't afford the repairs and moved and closed, really. So that's one story that I've learned in the process. And there really was very few Black residents here from about 1930 to the 50s and 60s, when open housing begins and Black population starts to explode a bit in the 70s and 80s here. So that's just something I'll share there. But thank you all for your stories this evening, and for your truths and your work in this journey. We definitely are watching and very thankful for each of you and your contributions to this moment and to this movement. Any final thoughts any of you have that you would like to share before we begin to wrap up?
We appreciate you inviting us to speak with you tonight.
Absolutely. And you all have been so generous with your, sorry, go ahead, Brenda.
I just want to echo that and just say we hope that we can continue to be partners and collaborators in this work.
Absolutely. You all were so generous with your time this evening. We appreciate you coming to taking the time out. Even I know it's a little bit later there than it is here, so I really do appreciate you all staying up a little late on this Zoom call for us. Believe it or not, we were talking about Asheville being one of the fastest growing states, or a very fast growing state. My dad's relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, 2 years ago now. And so I will actually be down there next week for Thanksgiving, visiting with them. And I might have to convince them to take that 2 hour trip up that way one day for a day trip. We drove through the mountains when we drove them down there, but haven't got to spend much time there. So might have to convince them to do that. So thank you all.
Let us know if you do, if whether it's Thanksgiving or not, we're happy to show you around.
Okay. Be careful. I may actually take you up on that. And so thank you. Perfect. Well, we will kick it back to Tatiana to conclude the evening.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you again. I'm very grateful personally to have been able to listen to all of you. Excited that you'll be welcoming Christian. Sounds like he'll be having Thanksgiving with you, so that's good. And everyone who's watching, thank you. The library will send an email tomorrow. We'll include all of the resources that were put in the chat. I'm excited to look through them myself, and we'll also include a feedback survey. It's quick and it helps us as we plan future programming like this. And as Christian mentioned, on Tuesday, December 14th, we will have another program focused on national reparations with Dr. William Darity and Kirsten A. Mullen. So we hope to see you there. And thank you again, everyone. Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.
Everybody.